Thank you for bringing this movie to us.
Wasn't that fun? That was a lot of fun, wasn't it?
It was fun to see it again. And you know, after Roger wrote the review of this movie, the first person he heard from was Cameron Crowe's mother.
That's
and she
fantastic.
said, you know, thank you for being good to my boy.
Life imitating art, imitating life.
Yes.
Back again. Well, that's
So,
fantastic.
Richard, will you moderate a panel?
Yes.
And I'd like to invite out with you Brian Tallarico.
Brian, come on out, my friend. You all know
Matt
Brian.
Solarsize.
Hey, buddy.
And Sam Fragoso.
There's Matt and there's Sam. Ladies and gentlemen, the Stillwater reunion. We look the same as we did 20 years ago. Jeff is going to get his T-shirt finally. All right, guys, come on over. Take a seat.
I think I have the horrible mustache for the band, actually.
I was joking with Sam that he looks like an undercover cop from a 70s movie.
I didn't know you were joking, so it's
You're
good.
under arrest!
You can pull it up. I just want to start off, I'm going to ask each of you guys to just relate when you first saw this film and how you feel about it seeing it again. We'll start with Brian and work our way to Matt and Sam.
Well, I was just saying when I saw it 20 years ago, I related a lot more to Patrick Puke's character, and now that I'm 20 years older and have 3 kids, I identify with Francis a little bit more than I did back then. I remember just being blown away. I was a relatively young writer at the time, and it tapped into so many things. I was lucky enough, I don't know if we'll get to this too, but I was lucky enough to grow up in a house of music. I had bookends on vinyl. I still do. My dad's copy that he gave to me. We listened to it all the time when I was growing up. So the music aspect of it, the nostalgia aspect of it, the writing aspect, I think a lot of the things that touched Roger about it hit me at the same time.
I hadn't even thought about the house full of music aspect, but I grew up in a family of jazz musicians, and my father is a composer and jazz pianist, Dave Zoller. And this, you know, I don't know what this says about me, but to me, like these scenes with these rock musicians, like, you know, hanging out and doing, you know, drinking and doing drugs and smoking pot and behaving badly and getting into trouble, that was my life. I mean, like, it was jazz musicians instead of rock musicians, but, like, all the little details, like Jason Lee putting shaving cream in it. You know, like, you think he's going to shave, like, touch up or something, and he puts it in his hair. You know, things like that. But when I first saw it, I gotta admit that my relationship with this movie has changed in a positive way because I liked it. I like Cameron Crowe's movies. I think he's a very good director, but it bothered me that this seemed like such a clean film about rock and roll. And I joked at the time that Cameron Crowe had made the kind of movie about rock and roll that his mother could watch. But now I feel differently about it, and it sort of feels more like in the spirit of, you know, he's a huge fan of Billy Wilder, and he actually did a book called Conversations with Wilder, which was done near the end of his life, which was a huge influence on my own film books, you know, Conversations with Directors. And this is not only is this in the spirit of a Billy Wilder film, like right down to the dialogue, the way he puts little buttons on the ends of scenes, you know, like, but also just the whole overdose scene is like straight out of his movie, The Apartment. And that's something he's totally not shy about admitting, that it's like this, the alternate title of this movie could be called I Love the Apartment. But I really felt this time more of a sense of sadness. And I felt like, I don't know, it just reminded me of my watching The Graduate again. It's funny what you were saying about now you empathize with Frances McDormand, but the first time I saw The Graduate, of course I empathized with Benjamin. And then I saw it again a few years later, and I empathized with Mrs. Robinson. And then I saw it again 10 or 15 years after that, and I was back to empathizing with Ben, but now it was a different point of view. It was like, God, I wish I could be that young again. So, you know, you come full circle, but that's what makes this a great movie, is that you can, you know, your perspective, your relationship to it changes as you watch it again.
I watched it for the first time when I was 13, so yesterday. And
How dare you? Cut Mike 2.
yeah, Richard's like, he's got to get off the stage now. I saw this movie and thought, that's exactly how I want my life to go. I want to go be a journalist. I want to go on the road. My parents were not as harsh. And you know, I always say, like, my mom, showed me Boogie Nights, and my dad showed me Goodfellas. So like they were much. I know it's a weird thing. My mom showed me Boogie Nights, but look, they were very supportive. And I just remember watching and thinking I'd love to do that. And then I met Matt, and he was a kind of Lester Bangs to me. And a whole bunch of other critics who took me under their wing and gave me all their advice. And so this movie, it felt like everything. It felt like
Can I just say what the saddest scene in this entire movie was?
Sure,
It actually made me cry. Is when they said how much they were going to pay him for that article.
I know. $700 for 3,000 words. Waits a minute, 1,000. Wow. That doesn't exist anymore. So that's the difference now, I guess. When I watched it 15 years ago, you could actually get paid in journalism.
Yeah.
And now you can't.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. I love some of the roles here. Ben Fong Torres, who always says, "I'm Ben Fong Torres" from Rolling Stone magazine, no matter what. And by the way, toward the end, we were talking about this. That's the actual Jan Wenner in the cab when he's trying to find Penny. That was actually Jan Wenner in the cab there. And so many other actors who have small roles here.
I had no idea that Jimmy Fallon was in this until we watched it.
Well, it was a gift to the movie gods, because then he did, what did he do with Queen Latifah? Where is
Taxi.
Taxi. And that's what convinced him that he should be a talk show host, and all of us as well, and God bless him. And Eric Stonestreet from Modern Family, right, was the clerk. Who else was
Mark
there?
Mark
Maron.
Maron's in
Mark
it.
Maron.
Yeah, Mark Maron's Locked the Gate.
Mark
guy.
Maron's the angry guy who chases after him. Lock
Yeah.
the gates, lock the gates.
Yeah.
Jay Baruchel's the enthusiastic kid. There's so many.
And Ray
Ray
Wilson,
Wilson.
playing the number 2 in The Office, sucking up to the boss, right? Let's talk. I want to talk to you guys as journalists, and this is a constant theme here, throughout the film about, hey, listen, they're not your friends. This is a business arrangement. Maybe each of you can talk a little bit about how you've always struck that balance, because I know, I'll tell you an anecdote. You guys probably know this. Roger was friends with some filmmakers, Robert Altman in particular. And I remember Roger told me that one of the reasons Roger and Gene always kept the show in Chicago was they didn't want to be running into everybody who was making movies all the time. They wanted to, have other conversations, because in LA, everybody's in the business, or there'd be more access. But Roger told me that Robert Altman once told him, if you never gave me a bad review, why would I care about the good ones? So he got that. But maybe each of you could just talk a little bit about how
I moved to
navigate that
LA,
line.
so maybe you two should answer this first.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, you're in LA, so you run into it more. It's true
But I
that
also
being
want to
in
ask you guys, on a
Chicago-
personal basis, have you become friendly,
Yeah.
or have you found yourself in a situation where you're going to give a negative review to someone who you've become friends with?
I have found myself in that situation, and then I usually can navigate it okay. I am lucky enough in the role at RogerEbert.com that we can kind of see that coming and avoid it. In other words, we assign things, so if someone's really close to someone...
I've
they're
had to be
probably-
pulled off a few things.
Exactly. They're probably not... Well, and it's not for any reason that we feel like people would be biased. We don't want to put them in an awkward position. It's like, you don't want to have to pan your friend's movie.
And also, if you're good enough, if you get to the point, if you're in the business long enough, and this is now 31 years since my first byline, you start to get to know these people, and it's
You
not
have
just
friends.
and it's not just people who are already famous when you are coming up. It's also that people who are your age who. You're a nobody as a journalist, and they're a nobody as a filmmaker. Like Wes Anderson, I
Right.
knew Wes Anderson from Dallas before he had just made his first short film, like before he'd even made a feature. So, I've known that guy since 1993, I guess, and I've never reviewed one of his movies because to me he's my friend Wes from Dallas. It's just weird, and there are people like that in your life sometimes. Like, it's 6 degrees of separation, but
not to mention, the people making the movies and the people writing about them have one common thing, which is they love movies deeply. And there's not that many people in the world. We're in a blessed place here that you've all showed up. But to have that overlap where you can really talk with someone.
And I think the really
it's-
good filmmakers like Altman, like you said, can take the criticism.
Yeah.
I actually had a filmmaker reach out to me a couple months ago who I knew a little bit. I gave his latest film 1 star, and he wrote to me and said, it's a well-thought-out review. I appreciate you taking the time to write it. So it can happen, believe
Did
me.
he
I had
disagree with your review?
Yeah, I think so. But you know what he said? He said it wasn't just like, oh, I hate this pan. He was like, you took the time to address the problems you had with it, so I have to respect that.
I've had incidents where it's rare, but once in a while a filmmaker or an actor or a screenwriter or somebody will read a negative review that I've written and go, yeah, that was a piece of shit, and you're the only person who said it.
They don't
I mean,
all
like
love us,
there's
don't get
5
me
or
wrong.
6 times maybe in my life that's happened. One time
Right.
was a fairly major actor who called me at the office, and he had read my pan of a new TV show he was in, and he's like, yeah, the show is terrible, and I'm terrible in it.
I did have a producer email me once, and just the whole email just said, "Why do you hate me?" A famous producer. I wrote back, and we had a good exchange, actually. I was like, "I don't hate you. What are you talking about?" And it turned out all right.
I actually, but talking about getting too close to people, I was just telling you some of these stories last night. But like, I wrote this book about the life and career of Oliver Stone, and I realized that I was becoming friends with Oliver. And I actually addressed him as Oliver in the book because I thought, like, I was calling him Stone in the first draft, and it's like, that's ridiculous. Like, he would like call me when I was at my son's soccer practice to tell me some anecdote about, you know, the General William Westmoreland when he was at West Point or something. And I'm like, can I call you back or something? But I knew that I was through the looking glass when we were going over the proofs of the book. I just doing like a final fact check with him, and it was at his house in L.A., and his daughter was transferring from one college to the other, and she came in and said, "Daddy, will you read my essay?" And he sat there, we were at the kitchen table with all the proofs laid out, and he read her essay, and then he was done with it, and he slid it across the table to me and said, "Now you take a pass at it." And I was like, okay. So I'm sitting there with a red pen, like checking his daughter's college transfer essay, and I actually heard a voice in my head saying, "You're through the looking glass now."
I think we're going to go to the audience soon, but I want to ask real quick a question.
Okay, yeah.
What's your Lester Bangs advice? Lester Bangs gives the kids so many pieces of advice in that movie. What's the piece of advice you remember getting from someone in terms of our industry? It could be from Roger even.
Yeah, in fact, you know, it's funny, Brian. Chaz had asked me before the movie almost that same question, and Roger did tell me this, and he, as you guys know, he kept writing this way. In fact, I think his voice got stronger every single year of his writing career. And it was just the idea, you know, have a Lester Bangs, or hope you do. Don't edit yourself. Don't censor yourself. Don't try to anticipate what the audience is going to think. And certainly, I find, don't try to, you know, sorry guys for some of you who are editors, but don't try to please your editors first. You know, right from the heart. Your editors and a great editor will let you know, okay, we need to chop a lot of this, or I'm going to make some cuts, and it's it's not supposed to be an adversarial relationship. And I know I've been lucky enough in a lot of cases. Some of the editors at the Sun-Times that I file stories to have been there, you know, were editing Roger's reviews. So I certainly respect and want their opinion and their feedback.
I'm not sure who gave me this piece of advice or if I read it somewhere, but I think it was someone asking another critic, what should I do before I become this? I want to do this. And the critic said, do everything else. Do anything else. Because to write about movies is to write about the world, it's to write about people. And I think I get emails often from people, I know this will be shocking, younger than me. And they ask me, what should I do? And I say, just like, one, read, write, accept jobs that do not pay you, and I don't know, go fall in love or something. Go get upset
that's great.
about something.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, you know, I'm sure you guys have gotten this too. You voice an opinion about something else, and you get the stick to movies. People tell you stick to movies, and I always ask these people what they do for a living on Twitter. And I'm in the mortgage business. Well, then stick to mortgages. You don't get to give your opinion on anything else. But Sam, that was wonderful advice you got. I think, you know, if you look back, Roger, as you all know, was a journalism major, but you know, was covering mainly sports. Gene Siskel was a philosophy major at Yale. I mean, I think studying different fields, I tell young people this all the time too. If you just, all I ever want to do is watch movies, study film, and then write reviews. Well, as Sam just said, movies are life. Live life outside the dark theater as well.
The best editor I ever had was a guy at the Star Ledger of Newark named Mark Diano, who was, before he became an editor there, he was a boxing columnist at the New York Post. And he was this, he's this big Italian guy with at the time he had a mullet and ridiculously broad shoulders, like he was built like a tank. And he called me kid, and he was 8 years older than me, and he called me kid. And but almost all of the good advice that I've ever given to students or younger writers is just repeating what Mark said. And one of the best pieces of advice he ever gave me was I was struggling on deadline because I had come from a weekly where you have 5 to 6 days to think about what you're going to write. And at a daily, it's like, so-and-so is dead, we need an obituary in 2 hours, and you have to write it. And he said, he saw me struggling to craft a lead and work my way through a story in a linear way, and he said, you're doing it wrong, just puke on the page. And I said, what does that mean? And he said, just literally vomit out every thought, every observation that you have, and you only have 2 hours to work with. Do that for 90 minutes and then spend the next 30 minutes moving things around on the page until it's remotely coherent and then send it in. And I've been doing that ever since. Don't tell anybody.
And do you imagine, can you believe that technology, only 18 minutes for a single page to transmit, Sam? That one.
I love that. Like it's the moon landing or something.
Well, at the old Sun-Times building, they used to actually have pneumatic tubes. You'd put your story in the tube, and at the City Hall, you could send them that way. Magical.
That's great.
Yeah, yeah, they were still there. And then they tore down that building, and somebody built a big tower on it. We're not going to say his name. Should we take questions, guys? What do you think? Sure. All right. Let's see. And obviously, feel free to talk about this movie if you want to ask the guys anything else in general as well. Show of hands. We never did the balcony. Right there.
I see people.
Young man. The young man that looked like, are they pointing to me? Yes, they are. They're you right there.
Going upstairs?
Okay, we're going to go upstairs first, and we'll get to that. We have
Balcony center. Hi, thanks for this movie, first of all. Every time I watch it, it makes me feel really good. But every time I watch this movie, I always think about the first thing that I remember seeing or hearing that made me want to write, like the first movie or review. So my question to all of you is, what was the thing that made you all want to become a critic? Whether it was an album or a movie or what?
That's a great question. Go ahead, guys. What was the movie or what the thing that made you want to become a critic?
Oh, God. Someone else go first. I have so many things floating around my head.
I never consciously set out to be a critic. It's just something that happened. But the first piece that I ever published that was film criticism was for my campus paper when I was a freshman. I wrote, it was 1988, and there were a bunch of Vietnam movies out, and I wrote a think piece about what was wrong with all of these Vietnam movies. And someday I'm going to dig that piece up and post it so that you can find out what a 19-year-old has to say about the misrepresentation of Vietnam.
I'd like to read that.
The other day,
I'm sure it's really filled with deep insight, so brace yourself.
The other day, I found a middle school newspaper review. Yes, we had a newspaper in our middle school where I reviewed cassette tapes, and I found my 4-star review of Slippery When Wet by Bon Jovi that I wrote in middle school. And I have this, and I should put it online,
Fantastic.
really.
That's great.
So it's so funny that I've been writing ever since I can remember. I wrote music reviews in my middle school newspaper. I was the film critic for my college newspaper all 4 years, and then pretty much right after that. It's just kind of always been there. And again, I grew up in a house of movies and music. My parents introduced me to film. And I've said this before. I think the main thing for me was that we would watch movies and then we would discuss them. Talk about the movies with your kids, and you'll engender a taste in film that's a little bit different than just watching it and then going on to something else.
First movie I ever reviewed, 21, which, talking about bad gambling movies, gets almost nothing right.
Yeah, and made from a really good nonfiction book. And they
Is
took
it?
Yeah,
Oh, I
they
haven't
actually,
read that. Okay.
about the real life MIT guys.
Counterparts.
Yeah, so that was your first review.
That was the
20
first review.
What made you want to do that, Sam?
That's longer than we can even answer right now, but it really was. I mean, actually, yeah. I saw a video review of you and Roger. I didn't put that together until you were sitting right next to me. And I watched, and I was in the process of moving from Chicago to California, which meant that I had to really make new friends, which is a real pain in the ass, as I said yesterday in my intro. And movies were the answer. Movies were a surrogate family. I know that sounds sad, but in a way, writing about them was, in that first year of moving to a new place, helped me do it. And oddly enough, you helped me do that. So
That's
thank
awesome.
you, Richard.
Thanks for saying
Thank
that.
you, Roger.
I actually had kind of an almost famous moment in terms of, pretending. I wasn't really pretending. I just didn't say what my age was. I was, I think, 15 or 16, and Chicago Magazine was looking for a new movie critic. And they had asked people to write a review and send it in. And my thinking was, at the time, I'm like, oh, well, everyone's going to send in a review of Star Wars or Jaws. So I reviewed Maltese Falcon as if it were a movie that had just come out. And then the editor called, and my mom picked up the phone and said, somebody from Chicago Magazine. She's like, oh, we're not interested in a subscription. No, it's like, well, no, I want to talk to, is your husband there? And she's like, he works for the Illinois Central Railroad. I don't think you want to talk to him. And it was me. And the guy, he said, I really enjoyed this. We're going to go with, he did not know what my experience was, but we're going to go with somebody, somebody else, but keep up the writing. And I was doing the same thing. Oh, well, thank you very much for that call. I appreciate it. Yeah.
Maltese Falcon, Bon Jovi.
There you go. All right, we had somebody else.
Right here in the center.
Fantastic.
Hi. Watching the opening sequence with the credits, the overhead shot of the records and all the tickets and things made me think immediately of To Kill a Mockingbird's opening sequence. And then I felt like there must have been some correlation because Frances McDormand and the younger actor are walking out of the movie theater. Do you know anything about that, or did you
Does anyone
feel
have
that?
any trivia on it?
Yeah,
it's obvious. It's clearly obvious. It's an homage, and then the apartment stuff is obvious too.
Yeah. He's a big fan of To Kill a Mockingbird, as you gathered, and he's very upfront about his influences, and it's not, it's that's true. The opening credits are very much like that, but also Atticus Finch is Frances McDormand in this movie. She's like the incorruptible parental figure. She's like true north for everybody. And, wow, what a miracle of casting. Like, they really got exactly the right actress for that part. Like, you have to cast a very special actress to have them be somebody who's believable as a woman who can put the fear of God in a rock star. And Frances McDormand is that person.
The casting all around. I mean, Billy Crudup is even better than I remembered. He's
Veruza
perfect.
Balk, I forgot how good she is in this. Yeah. She's terrific.
Yeah, and really when you look at Frances McDormand's performance as well as Philip Seymour Hoffman, probably 70% of it is telephone acting, as we call it. They're just doing. They're actually they have a couple of scenes with the main.
And
characters.
I love what he does. He does the little moment where it's in one of his later scenes where he's talking to him on the phone and he says something and he comes and he gets through a sentence and then he looks off to the side and he goes, ah. And then he says his next line and it's like that's exactly what a critic would do. He heard it. He heard the thing he's about to say in his head and he was like, that's not bad. And then he tells it to the kid.
So true.
On the floor to your left. Floor to your left.
Right here.
So among many critics, there's a consensus that Cameron Crowe's movies have kind of gone downhill after this one. Do you agree with this consensus, and do you think he'll ever be able to recapture the specialness of this movie?
No.
No, with the first part or the second part?
You can't recapture any movie. It's just not possible. But I think he's a talented guy, and I hope he's not watching this live stream after that question.
Some of his doc work since then has been really good. Pearl Jam 20 was really interesting. He's done some interesting stuff in that regard. I think Vanilla Sky is actually a little underrated. I think it's got some interesting stuff in it.
That's a great 9/11 movie.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, since then he kind of, I think, has followed his own interests and done his own thing. Do I think he could make another masterpiece? Of course, I really do. I mean, he's clearly talented enough, but I think I just saw a documentary at Sundance, which is basically him talking to David Crosby for an hour and a half because he felt like doing it. So in other words, he's kind of following his own dreams and wishes, and so I think that's okay at a certain point in a filmmaker's career, and maybe he'll come back.
How old was James Ivory when he won his first Oscar? He was like in his 80s, right, or something?
Yeah. So there's always that hope. Gosh, I wish I could think of the name of the actor who plays the manager in the band because he's the one that has Tom
Noah
Cruise.
Taylor.
Yeah, thank you,
Jinx.
guys. Because he's then in Vanilla Sky. Cameron often uses a waking dream. This is your waking dream. I don't pretend to know what goes on inside the mind of someone like Cameron Crowe, but in some ways, you think about Say Anything and Almost Famous, and he was such a young, achiever and wrote the book that became Fast Times at
rock and
Ridgemont
roll.
High.
Everything he's done on film is a rock.
It's basically a rock
and
and roll. But he was so good at the coming of age things, and I think sometimes filmmakers, John Hughes certainly had a lot of difficulty with moving beyond that, although he did it with Planes, Trains, and Automobiles beautifully, but didn't write a lot, in his later years, because in both cases they were so good at capturing the voice of young people, and sometimes they think, well, what am I going to do now? Because sometimes it's really difficult to keep in touch with what the younger generation is doing when you're not a part of it.
We have a question, kind of center right here.
This is the last question, I believe.
And this is the last question for you.
Hey, it's a general question for the whole panel, but I kind of wanted to know kind of your guys' take on the difference between movie criticism and movie reviews, if you guys had opinions about like the rise of the YouTube movie reviewer. I know, Mr. Roper, you had the YouTube reviews that you did for Reel's channel. I always watch those, but kind of just, I guess that, like, what your guys' thoughts on that, positive or negative or anything like that.
I guess. What was that?
It's a crowded field right now. I'm not going to sit here and say all video interviews are a waste of time. There's certainly good ones, like what he was doing with Reels and stuff like that, but it's also very much a field where you can just record yourself with a phone and throw it up on YouTube and call it a review, and that's not necessarily the case. I still believe in the editorial process of reviews, whether that's, even when I was younger, I would send my reviews to friends to have them look at them. In other words, I believe in the collaborative process of writing a review, whether it's with an editor at another outlet or a writer with me, that is kind of missing from a lot of that guerrilla YouTube video review culture. So they're kind of different beasts in that sense, in my opinion.
Well, there's a lot of really shallow kind of quick hit writing.
I wasn't going to go there.
Being done right now, and it's it's a reaction to the economy that we're in. Like, it doesn't make economic sense to put a tremendous amount of work into drafting and redrafting a review and having it have some kind of internal structure with a beginning and a middle and an end. Like, puking on the page is still being done, but the editorial part has gone missing. And it's not because people are bad or lazy. It's because, like, the journalism economy has shrunk to the point where it doesn't make sense anymore to do that. And I've actually had conversations with writers who, like, there have been many times where it's like somebody has a day job and they're doing a piece for us, and it's like, you know what, you've done 2 drafts of this thing, and I feel like I can't in good conscience ask for another one. So we're going to try to, like, any remaining problems, we're going to try to fix them on the editorial side, because after a certain point, it just becomes cruel and unusual punishment in this economy.
Yeah, not even just day jobs. I mean, most people who are making a living doing what we're doing are doing it multiple places. So you got to move from one review to the next very, very quickly.
I wrote for Salon.com like about 10 years ago, and I was under contract with them, and I had to write 8 pieces a week. And so that's more than 1 piece in a day, and I was a single parent with 2 kids. So basically, I was like eating and going to the bathroom and sleeping 4 hours a night, and I was writing.
In the very recent future, I wrote 4 full-length film reviews in one day, because I had to.
To answer the difference between movie reviews and movie criticism, which I think is the first thing you asked, I personally don't know the distinction between those two. I think there's a distinction between something that's good and something that's terrible. And since they've pointed out very smartly the things that aren't going well and the things they do believe in that are going well, my only solution that I've come up with, and I don't know if it will work, but it's going to require, for criticism to exist and for people to get paid to do it, it's going to require one of 2 things. One is a series of benevolent benefactors who are very rich, who just happen to love film criticism, which is probably not going to happen. Or the second thing...
If you know who they are,
please
recommend them.
We'll give them our emails. The second is that the people who love it, and that includes many of the people in here, definitely includes everyone in here, includes all of us, we are going to have to pay for the writing. And that's going to be a small paywall. It will be what you do with the New York Times and the New Yorker, but it's going to be specialty, because that's all that's going to be able to exist in the future. I don't mean to be so gloomy about it, but I think that's what you're going to see.
Well, I think it could also, I see a future that's a little crowdfunded, or Patreon, that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
I know people who have newsletters that go out to their fans, and those fans pay 50 cents a buck for a newsletter. But if you have enough of them, it turns into a job.
Any means of reader, listener support, that's what it's going to have to be, I think.
I just last year, a big website contacted me and wanted me to write something, and I asked what we always will ask, the 2 words, how much? And they said, this will be great exposure for you.
Right.
And I said, I live in Chicago. If I want exposure, I'll walk out the fucking door in January, okay? And I'll feel exposure. So, excuse my language. Okay, we got to wrap it up. Thanks so much. On that note, thank you guys.
Thank you all.
And in the immortal words of Almost Famous, they're not people, they're journalists.